is one of America's most prolific serial killers, responsible for the deaths of numerous women during the 1980s and 1990s. His story isn't just one of brutal crime, but also one that provides insight into the complexities and often disturbing contradictions of human psychology. His life and murders paint a picture of a man who was disturbingly adept at hiding his true nature from those around him, very similar to John Wayne Gacy in that regard. Ridgway was born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, into a troubled family environment. His childhood, while not extraordinary in the way that some serial killers' early lives are depicted, had elements that many psychologists point to as red flags. Ridgway's relationship with his mother was particularly complicated. She was known to be a dominant figure in his life, and their relationship, according to Ridgway, involved inappropriate and confusing behaviors. As he later claimed, his mother's actions and influence instilled feelings of both resentment and attachment in him, creating a deep inner turmoil. Though some of these details only surfaced much later, they provide a window into the psychological foundation that would shape Ridgway's later actions. Ridgway's early years were also marked by struggles with academic performance and social integration. In school, he was often described as below average, particularly in reading and writing. His classmates sometimes bullied him, and he struggled to make lasting connections. As he entered adolescence, Ridgway displayed behaviors that would later prove to be ominous. He once lured a young boy into the woods and stabbed him, leaving him to bleed but ultimately survive. This early act of violence is often viewed as a testing ground for Ridgway's later actions, a moment where he realized his own capacity for inflicting harm and perhaps his fascination with it. soliciting their services. Then, once he had them in a secluded area, he would strike. Typically, he would strangle his victims using either his hands or ligatures, and sometimes engage in post-mortem activities. This form of killing was intimate, brutal, and deliberate. Strangulation isn't quick or easy. It requires sustained force and direct contact with the victim. For Ridgway, the act of strangling his victims allowed him to exercise a twisted sense of control, and he seemed to relish the power he held in those moments. Ridgway's acts went beyond just killing. After murdering his victims, he often disposed of their bodies near the Green River or in wooded areas around Seattle. Sometimes he would return to the sites where he'd left their bodies, moving them, redressing them, or even engaging in necrophilic acts. This behavior is chilling, reflecting a complete disregard for the humanity of his victims. To Ridgway, they were objects that he could manipulate even in death. His actions demonstrated a deep-seated obsession with domination and control, and an utter lack of remorse. One of the most disturbing aspects of Ridgway's crimes is that he was able to maintain a facade of normalcy. While he was actively killing, he was holding down a steady job, maintaining relationships, and even engaging in religious activities. At one point, he became a regular attendee at a local church and claimed to have found religion. He would talk to others about his faith and the changes he wanted to make in his life. It's a bitter irony, as he would sometimes go from church services to seeking out his victims. This pattern of compartmentalizing his life is a hallmark of many serial killers, and it's one of the reasons he was able to evade capture for so long. But to his co-workers, he was just Gary, an unremarkable man who seemed a bit quiet, but otherwise harmless. As the bodies continued to turn up and fear grew among the public, law enforcement faced immense pressure to catch the Green River Killer. However, Ridgway's crimes were carefully planned to avoid detection. He frequently left his victims in remote, forested areas, making it challenging for investigators to connect the cases or trace the murders back to him. The use of forensic evidence was still in its developing stages in the 1980s, and Ridgway's careful avoidance of obvious evidence left police with few leads. As the years passed and the murders continued, frustration and anxiety built within the Seattle area, with each discovery of a new body amplifying the fear that the Green River Killer might never be caught. Police resources were strained, and they launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. Yet, despite the growing pile of evidence and the relentless efforts of detectives, Ridgway remained elusive, largely due to the limitations in forensic science at the time. By the mid-1980s, the investigation faced a serious lack of breakthroughs. The police interviewed hundreds of suspects, and Ridgway himself was even questioned several times. Early on, he was seen as a possible suspect due to his connections to the area and his interactions with several of the victims. Ridgway's alibis, calm demeanor, and ability to blend in with the surroundings allowed him to deflect suspicion. The police had little concrete evidence to tie him directly to the murders, and without DNA or advanced forensic methods, investigators left at a dead end. Ridgway's ability to continue killing during this time underscores how his psychological profile enabled him to evade detection. His emotions were shallow and compartmentalized, which allowed him to appear convincingly normal even while he was committing horrendous crimes. He had the chilling capacity to disassociate from his actions, mentally distancing himself from the suffering he inflicted. To Ridgway, his victims were just objects, tools through which he exercised control and fulfilled a deep-seated drive to kill. This ability to mask his true self and function in society while harboring such dark impulses is one of the defining characteristics of many serial killers. As the investigation continued, the lack of hard evidence led detectives to seek help from the emerging field of criminal profiling. The FBI's behavioral science unit attempted to construct a psychological profile of the Green River Killer, analyzing his behavior patterns, choice of victims, and disposal methods. They concluded that the killer was likely someone who felt inadequate or disempowered in life, and was using these murders as a means of asserting control. The profile suggested that he would likely have an unremarkable job, live in the area, and might even have a family. This profile was fairly accurate in describing Ridgway, but it still wasn't enough to actually catch him. In the 1990s, as forensic technology evolved, investigators began using DNA analysis in the hopes of finding a breakthrough. DNA was collected from various crime scenes and stored, waiting for technology that could help identify the killer. Finally, in 2001, forensic scientists were able to link DNA evidence from several of the victims to Ridgway. The breakthrough was a significant turning point in the case. After nearly 2 decades of terrorizing the region, Ridgway was arrested, marking the end of a dark chapter for Seattle and its surrounding communities. The arrest shocked those who knew Ridgway, especially his wife, who had believed in his innocence even as he became a suspect in the 1980s. She, like many others, couldn't reconcile the image of the mild-mannered, church-going truck painter with the heinous Green River Killer. Ridgway's unassuming appearance and ordinary life had served as a shield, allowing him to slip under the radar for so many years. His arrest forced many to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil can sometimes hide in plain sight, behind the mask of the mundane. In custody, Ridgway eventually confessed to killing 71 women, though he was only convicted of 49 murders, making him, as I stated in the intro, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His confessions were cold, almost mechanical, as he recounted the details of his murders with minimal emotion. His willingness to confess so freely came in part from a deal with prosecutors that spared him the death penalty in exchange for his cooperation in helping to locate the bodies of his victims. He led investigators to multiple sites